Hello everyone, my name is Ryan Kinchin, and today I want to give a practical comparison between the Segway Ninebot ES4 and the Boosted Rev. Now jumping straight into it, I want to first talk about the mileage. Now, the mile range for each scooter is actually very comparable. The Ninebot ES4 is supposed to have a max range of about 28 miles per charge, whereas the Boosted Rev is supposed to have a maximum range of about 22 miles per charge. I weigh about 190 pounds, and on either scooter, the max range I typically get is about 15 to 17 miles per charge. Now, I ride pretty hard in general, but anytime I go on long trips or I'm riding around a big city for the day, I ride as conservatively as possible, and still the max range falls within about 15 to 17 miles. In my opinion, the range is not an issue at all. 15 to 17 miles is plenty range for any riding that I do one way. What's important now is, say you're riding to work, riding to school, or you're just riding around the city for fun. The question is, do you have a place to charge the scooter, and how much time do you have to charge the scooter if you plan to do more riding than about 15 miles in one day? To put this in perspective, the Ninebot ES4 takes about 5 to 7 hours to charge from, I would say, 25% charge up. The Boosted Rev, on the other hand, can charge from about 20% charge to 100% in about 2.5 to 3.5 hours. Not too long ago, I went to San Francisco for the day just to ride around, and I was lucky enough to find a restaurant that would allow me to charge my scooter while I was eating lunch. So I had ridden probably, I would say, 7 miles before going to the restaurant for lunch. And in the hour that I was sitting there eating, the scooter charged up to about 95%. And that got me through another, 6 or 7 miles in San Francisco, going up and down the hills before I left that day. And it was perfect being able to ride the Boosted Rev and charge it up to nearly 100% in just one sitting for about an hour. If we compare the amount of time it takes to charge the Boosted Rev to the Ninebot ES4, charging the ES4 in 1 hour while I'm having lunch would have been totally implausible, because after an hour of charging that scooter, I would have probably gone from about 60% to maybe 72% charge. So really, the ES4 for someone like me with my needs was only useful if the sum of the miles for the entire trip that I'm riding is no greater than, the 15-mile range that I said before. That being said, I would say the Boosted Rev definitely beats the Ninebot ES4 in terms of mileage and charge speed. I just want to once again say that even though the ES4 claims that they can get up to about 28 miles per charge, I'm sure that's true for someone that, smaller, weighs less than 190 pounds. But in my case, being able to charge the scooter more quickly so that I can charge it while I'm out eating lunch or riding the train is much more valuable to me than having just 1 or 2 extra miles that I can effectively get out of riding a scooter with a longer range. Moving on now, one area where the ES4 dramatically outperforms the Boosted Rev is in how bright the headlight is. Initially, I thought the headlight on the Boosted Rev would be much brighter than the ES4 because you see this very large headlight unit on the handlebars, but that just happened to not be the case at all. When you compare the Boosted Rev headlight to the ES4, there's no comparison. The ES4's headlight is much brighter. It projects further. It's a much fuller light, and all around, it's just much better. I'd say the tail light on each scooter is comparable. Neither one seems to outperform the other one enough for me to really prefer one over the other. Although I do like that the ES4 has a strip light on the side of the battery. I don't know. That's just a nice touch. And, adding to that, I think both scooters are very attractive. Even though I greatly prefer riding the boosted rev. I think both scooters are definitely pretty. The last thing I really want to talk about for now is the controllability of each scooter, the comfort of riding each scooter, and also kind of your foot comfort when you're standing on the footboard of each scooter. For me, I'd say the top difference in controllability between both of the scooters has to do with the sensitivity of the throttle. Now, on the boosted rev, when you give any amount of gas, throttle on that scooter, it immediately gives you power. It immediately gives you a smooth gradient or full throttle depending on how you're riding. Whereas the Ninebot ES4, you can give it full throttle from a stop, and it may take you actually 2 seconds before the scooter really kicks in. And then now that I've been riding the Ninebot ES4 for about at this point 8 months, it's showing more and more issues, especially with the throttle, where sometimes you give it gas and it takes about 2 seconds for it to actually kick in. You'll let off the gas, it'll take another 1.5 or 2 seconds to even let off the throttle, which is honestly a safety issue. Beside the throttle, the next most obvious difference between the comfort of riding each scooter shows in how each scooter controls when you hit bumps. Now, the Ninebot ES4 is actually pretty nice because it has front suspension. The suspension sounds absolutely terrible when you hit any bump, especially large bumps. It sounds like you just hit a fence with a bat, and it scares people, and it scares me sometimes too. But it actually does give you some good cushion. Whereas the boosted rev does not have any built-in suspension, but the boosted rev does have tires that have air inside of them, as opposed to having solid rubber tires like the Ninebot ES4. The boosted rev is generally very comfortable riding, but the fact that it has no suspension really shows when you're on a road that is very, very bumpy or very uneven. If you're riding, especially if you're riding fast and you suddenly hit a decent sized bump, it can give you enough energy, enough impulse in the handlebars that it's very easy to let go of the handlebars. So I would say, even though I greatly prefer riding the boosted rev, and I think it's a much smoother ride in general, when it comes to hitting bumps or unexpected potholes or something, I think the controllability of the Ninebot ES4 is actually slightly better in that case. But don't get me wrong, I 100% stand by the saying 90% of the time the boosted rev is much smoother, much easier to control, and just a comfortable scooter to ride. The final difference in comfort that I'm going to talk about today is in the comfort of standing on the footboard of each scooter. The boosted rev has a much wider footboard compared to the Ninebot ES4, and that wider board is much more comfortable to stand on when you're riding more than 2 miles or 3 miles at a time. Also, when you go from scooter to scooter, so say you ride the boosted rev and then you just randomly decide to jump on the Ninebot ES4, the footboard is so much more narrow on the ES4 that you kind of feel like your balance is being challenged. If you were to just ride the ES4 typically start to finish on a ride, you wouldn't notice much of a difference. But the footboard is higher off the ground and it's thinner, so that combination makes you feel much less stable when riding. Where the boosted rev has a much wider footboard, it's much lower to the ground, and that makes you feel much more stable. But in addition to that, your feet feel much more comfortable when you're going on long rides. So to sum things up, those are my most recent thoughts on the Ninebot ES4 and the boosted rev. The last thing I really want to share is that if you live in Los Angeles, San Francisco, Seattle, or New York, an electric scooter is a great way to get around. It's extremely cheap, It's a really quick way to get around town, and it's really, really fun. The only thing is, if you are just getting into riding electric scooters and you're testing the waters, I would say that's an appropriate situation where you may consider getting something like the Ninebot ES4. But if you are buying something that you intend to ride every day in all sorts of weather, and it's something that you're relying on as your primary means of transportation, I highly recommend getting either the Boosted Rev or some other scooter that has very high reviews and very few negative comments, or very little negative feedback. Um, because I made another video about the Ninebot ES4 and how I had initially bought two of them, and one of them immediately had issues out of the box. Error messages were always going off. The scooter would just start beeping randomly and stop me from riding. And the second scooter that I held on to, that scooter has been running very well for the last 8 or 9 months. But at this point, it's starting to show issues. The error messages are starting to come up for just random reasons, and it'll stop me. I have to turn the scooters on and off and on and off before the message goes away. So if you want to just have something that is reliable and comfortable or to ride, I highly recommend looking at some of the slightly more expensive, slightly higher end scooters, because you just can't go wrong. Anywho, thank you. I hope you enjoy this video.